Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 1 discussion. Welcome to patch 3.28.0c. This is the big week 2 patch for Mirage, and it has one of the funniest lines of text inside a set of patch notes that I've seen in a while. Bird bravery will not be tolerated. That said, there's a lot more serious changes in this as well. I want to quickly go through exactly what's in this. Mostly this is what I would call a mid-league improvement patch to the Mirage content. However, there are some bug fixes, some of which will be more impactful than others, and we'll start with one that is probably on the lower impact end, but that's where Grinding Gear Games decided to start. If you are playing a Moon Temple oriented strategy inside the Mirage League, then definitely pay attention to this bit. Fix a bug where Mirages were unable to bleed into the boss arena inside the Moon Temple map narrowly. So the normal behavior is that Vrashta picks a spawning point on the map. We don't know the exact formula of this, but there's a whole lot of things that we suspect we know about it. And then it flood fills, so it basically goes in all directions, filling up spots that are adjacent to where it currently is and keeping on expanding until it can't expand anymore. In the Moon Temple map narrowly, it appears that the Mirages could not extend into the boss arena. So if they reached the boss arena, they just didn't keep expanding there. It's one of those things that's kind of interesting, but not really all that important, because for most people, I feel Moon Temple is a kind of once per league map, or maybe a little bit more than a once per league map. It's a terrible layout, even though it is an absolutely gorgeous tile set, and I don't expect that this is going to change it. This is technically slightly better for certain strategies, slightly worse for others, but only relevant if you're running a Moon Temple strategy. Next, though, we have the highest impact thing here, I think. This is a change to the way that the Wish for Rust and the Wish for Terror work. Now, Wish for Rust, this is the one that causes the dude that drops the black barrier to spawn inside the map, previously alongside the final map boss. The Wish for Terror is similar, except instead it brings in one of the pinnacle bosses that is a part of the Feared. So, the Wish for Rust and the Wish for Terror, they now cause the enemies they spawn to be summoned when you break the astral chain. This replaces the old behavior where one of them was spawning alongside every single final map boss that was present in the Mirage area. What this means, if you are not running Maven Witness, then this means that you are going to see these particular wishes more frequently than you saw in the past. And when you do see them, they're going to be no better and no worse than they used to be, just slightly different. Actually, maybe slightly easier to defeat. That's because you're going to be facing only one boss in the final room. And if the boss is present in your Mirage, then you're going to face one boss plus one special boss, whether it be the dude that drops the black barrier or whether it be the Feared member. However, the other case is when you are running Maven aligned. In this situation, you might have been encountering 3 or even 4 map bosses in the final room, and then you were getting 3 or even 4 members of the Feared, or more impactfully, 3 or even 4 of the dudes that drop the black barrier. And likewise for a number of other strategies like the City Square boss rush. This is going to be a pretty big shake-up here to the way that these are run. It will be more common for these particular wishes to show up because they no longer require that Vrashta has spawned adjacent to a map boss, or not necessarily adjacent, but within range. All they require now is that you are a sufficiently high enough area level rather than being in range of a map boss as well. But for those strategies that were running this Maven Witness, this is definitely quite a nerf. Also, a bug fix has been made where Wish for Rust was twice as common as it was intended to be over in the Ruthless game mode. After this, we have one of the least impactful things that I can think of. The granted skill to return to the portal in Mirage is no longer considered a spell. Now, this already got some quality of life changes in an earlier patch, I think it was 3.28.0b, but this one is one of the smaller changes, but it does allow you to use Gruthkul's Pelt. You're still never going to use Gruthkul's Pelt. This item is terrible, but now Gruthkul's Pelt is no longer going to turn off your ability to walk back to the entrance of the Mirage. Now, I don't think anyone had discovered the fact that Gruthkul's Pelt was turning off your ability to go back to the entrance of a Mirage, because this item is just so bad that you would never consider using it with or without this. And so bugs like this just don't get figured out. After this, we have a quality of life improvement that is substantial. Empowered Mirage map items now have special art. So these are the maps that have the entirety of the map replaced with a Mirage. So they're way better than a normal map. These, however, have the drawback of just not being all that visible. And now they're going to have special art so that it's much clearer exactly what your maps are. I do find that I am separating out manually my Originator maps, my standard tier 16 maps, and my empowered Mirage maps, as well as other combinations, like you can get an empowered Mirage and Originator map. All of these are getting separated from each other, which is kind of clunky and awkward. I'd really like it if we could have different affinities for these things, and particularly if we could have a situation where whenever I control click a map, if it is just a tier 16, it will go to the first square of my tier 16s or bleed over into the second, third, fourth, fifth. But the ones that have the Mirage or the ones that have the Originator influence, that they would go into my tier 16 6th tab. That I think would be the best situation we could possibly have when it comes to dealing with all of the map management that's presently the case. Normally, people are building up an enormous amount of tier 16 maps, but I'm feeding mine to my Kingsmarch mappers, and as a result, I don't even have my first tab of tier 16s full, but I do almost have a full tab of Originator influenced ones. Fixed a bug where the Mortar projectile spell used by the Astral Instrument monster did no damage. Watch out. This is going to be something very dangerous. Something was doing no damage that was meant to do damage. Every time this happens, there are hardcore rips to it. Every single time. Now, unfortunately, I'm posting this video a little bit too late. So if you have found yourself removed from hardcore as a result of this, well, sorry. But definitely read patch notes in future. This is the sort of thing you've got to be really careful of, because sometimes these sorts of abilities can be overtuned, but even if they're not, they're just something that you've trained yourself not to take seriously. And now we have 3 new wishes. These are big ones. I expect they're going to be quite rare, but I also expect they're going to be quite good. The Wish for Flame grants you a coin of power on breaking the astral chain. Out of the Wish for Tides, which grants a coin of knowledge on breaking the astral chain. Out of the Wish for Sands, which grants a coin of skill upon breaking the astral chain. So these are pretty big deals here. This is just new ways of getting those coins, and those coins are pretty strong. They are the borrowed power of the league. They're genuinely quite rare, but not staggeringly rare. But this is going to provide a new source of them. Even if these are very rare, often quite a small nudge in overall drop rates can feel quite big. So keep an eye on these ones, and you're pretty much always going to take these. Even if you're playing in solo self-found and you've got no immediate plans for a coin of power, you're going to want to take Wish for Flame when it comes up, not because you necessarily need it right now, but because you're likely to need it in the future. General improvements and changes. Short of the display text for subsequent notifications of Faustus having sold your items. Thank you. Toast notifications are no longer displayed over the top of the inventory panel. Thank you again. The amount that I've been trading, I have definitely been wishing that Faustus would shut his mouth at times, and also that he would stop having quite such intrusive notifications at times. There are times that I do want to see exactly what the details were. So for instance, if I saw your Eclipse support has sold for 32 divines, I'd be very interested in quickly mousing over that one. But I don't really need to see, hey, that jewel that you put in for 11C a week ago, that has finally sold. That's nice, it's sold, someone's gonna be happy with it, I'm just happy to be rid of it, and I don't need Faustus singing at me every single time. Shrines which attach ongoing secondary effects to the player, such as Shocking Shrine, now have a limit of how many of these effects they can continue to attach through getting many copies of these shrines active at once. This is one I'm assuming is a performance thing, and also something that's just dealing with some of the weirdest corner cases that come up with these. There weren't really super reliable ways to get lots and lots of these. You could get multiple of them, but it wasn't super reliable. As a result, I don't think that this is going to feel like a nerf overall. I think this is going to be one of those things where just when you were getting so many of these that it was starting to impact performance, then at that point, it's going to stop. All lost shipment chests, except for the central one, are now destructible with damage. Thank you. I have lost shipments on one of my atlases at the moment, so I'm very happy to see this one. The central chest in a lost shipment now has a more distinctive label as well. Yeah, these have been a lot of fun to play around with, but they are something that have been missing a bit of quality of life. This is going to make them feel a bit better than they were before. If you've never played around with them though, they are quite good. It's something that only really works on a Kingsmarch Atlas alongside Kingsmarch Scarabs, but you don't necessarily need to use any of the rare or expensive Scarabs. You can just use it alongside the basics, and they're just kind of fun. You will also sometimes get some of the very high value tattoos from them, because this league, tattoos are quite expensive. One of the ones, the Herald Amplification effect, it's only in the uncommon tier, it's not one of the really rare ones, and it's something like 2.25 divines, I think, last time I was checking, and there's a few others that are worth quite a bit as well. At the map device, hovering a map or fragment in your inventory will now highlight the map device slots the item can go in. So this is something that's useful if you're not sure exactly where you would place, say, a fragment of the Chimera. It will show you where it goes. That said, you don't really need this. This is something that's like a very small quality of life thing that doesn't matter that much, because the map device will put them in the correct order for you. At the map device, while in controller mode, players can now select unique maps or boss fragments from their inventory to navigate to those locations on the atlas and insert the item into the map device. I'm assuming this is quite an important quality of life for controller players. As a keyboard and mouse player myself, I would right-click in that situation, but controller players definitely deserve that quality of life too. While we're at it though, I would like to say that one thing I think would be really useful would be having the ability to pull unique maps from your stash. So if I was to right click on Maelstrom of Chaos, which I have not done this league because I've got my 10 points without doing Maelstrom of Chaos, if I was to right click on that on the atlas, I would like it to be able to pull a Maelstrom of Chaos, if available, from my map stash tab and then put it directly into the map device. I think that would be a really useful quality of life thing, but again, it's not super important because a lot of these are just once per league things. The map stash has been buffed for Conqueror and Elder Guardian map types. I think this is only going to come up in pretty rare circumstances, but it will be very, 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 very welcome. If you're running, say, a Shaper Guardian destructive play setup, then you'll be really happy to see this because you will be a net producer and a very large scale net producer of Veritania maps. And maybe you will end up reaching a point where you've got more than 72 Veritania maps. And in that situation, well, now you can have 432 of them if you so desire. Likewise for Elder Guardian maps, if your King's March mappers aren't yet at the point that they can crunch through them for you, then you build up a huge lot of them. All right, now we have one to talk about that's been one of the most controversial changes we've seen, and it has also gone so far as to result in an angry Reddit thread about it. The thing is that the ship has already sailed on this one because the flippers have already made all of their currency from it, whatever ends up happening with this long term. So Gruthkul Games decided that instead of defeating Incarnations and instead of completing maps when not under the effect of an Astrolabe, instead of that being the primary source of league-specific Astrolabes, the best source should instead be Harvest. So they added a new Harvest crafting option that allows you to destroy a Runic Astrolabe or a Fungal Astrolabe or any of the other off-meta unpopular Astrolabes in order to get a chance of getting a Breach one. This has resulted in a fair backlash, but it is important to say there are people who do like this change as well. This is not one that is all negative. This is one where some people love it, some people hate it. And ultimately, a lot of that comes down to how much people engage with trade. This is something that has made engaging with trade worse than it was before, because now if you're playing an off-meta strat, whether that be Legion, whether that be Ultimatum, whether it be Expedition, whether it be Blight, any of these strategies, and you are using Astrolabes on it, you're now finding that you are in economic competition with people you were not in economic competition with before, and those players are wealthier than you. The main thing though is that currently this change has made it so that Harvest is the best source of league-specific Astrolabes, which I don't think it should be. I think it should be coming from the Originator content, and potentially not just the Originator, but also from just generic high-tier mapping. That should be the primary source of these Astrolabes rather than Harvest being the primary source. So I don't really like this change, but then again, I can see why some individuals do like it because it means they can avoid having to engage quite so often with trade in order to focus on a particular type of content. So one of those things where there's definitely a case for and a case against the change, but I think the real problem here isn't so much that the change was made, it was that the change was dropped without any sort of discussion of, oh, should we do this or should we not do it? Instead, it's just, here's a fait accompli, flippers, go and eat good, go and buy up every single cheap Astrolabe on the market and react accordingly, and then everyone else can deal with that. That's been the effect of this, and ultimately, I'm not a big fan of changes like this. This sort of thing I think Gruthkul Games should have said instead, we're considering making this change, let us know what you think, and then players could give their feedback. Not everyone will be happy with whatever they decided, but at the very least, you wouldn't have this situation where it's just suddenly this massive economic bombshell that gets dropped. I'm generally not a fan of mid-league buffs to the best strategies and mid-league nerfs to the worst strategies, and that's exactly what this change has ended up being. Ailith can now be interacted with from further away in the Monastery of the Keepers. This one is just going to be a very small quality of life thing. So when they're talking about interacting with Ailith, this is either bringing up her dialogue options, or it's handing in some of those pieces of Breach monsters that you have to collect at various points in the Breach storyline. That's going to be a bit cruisier than it was before. Hovering a Volatile Vaal Orb over an item, don't misclick. This is now going to show the modified range of individual stats values. This is going to be really, really good because sometimes it's not entirely clear what can and what cannot be affected by a Volatile Vaal Orb. This is going to clarify absolutely for you which things can and cannot be. Also, there's a couple of things later on this with 2 specific unique items that we'll come to. That's in the Bugfixes section. Vagan's crafting bench to complete incubators now has a more descriptive label for what interacting with a crafting bench will do. This is important for those of you that accidentally put Vagan into that spot, because this is one of the weakest things that I can imagine out of the entire Betrayal system. Holy Flame Totems now have an enemy targeting range that matches spell totems, for real this time. I believe in the past they were not targeting as far away as they should. This should be quite a big buff, and Holy Flame Totems, honestly, they've had quite a number of buffs in this patch, so there's something that people have been playing around with. This is just going to make them a bit better than it was. Here's a quality of life thing. Added the currency stash tab affinity to the following items: Refracting Fog, Volatile Vaal Orb, Crystallized Rancor, Coin of Restoration, Desecration, Knowledge, Power, Skill, and added the Essence stash tab affinity to the Essence of Desolation. So even if you don't own the associated premium tabs, so if you don't own an Essence tab, this is still going to be useful because you probably have a stash tab affinity set up for Essences somewhere, and Essence of Desolation will now go where you expect it to go. It won't be sitting inside your currency tab or inside your dump tabs. And likewise, all of these more esoteric currencies that exist inside the Mirage League, they're now going to be directed to your currency tab if plausible. Unstable breaches that have increased time, and this is due to the Clawed Open Atlas notable, they will now display a second progress bar while you are using that extra time. I actually would need to play around with this to get a sense as to whether it's impactful or not. Visually adjusted the Fog of War on the Atlas such that it is easy to tell what is explored and what is not yet explored. This is something that I found a little bit frustrating when I was getting started with the Atlas. Sometimes things were not adjacent to any of the maps that you'd done, but just by proximity they were showing up. And as a result, you were thinking, oh, that's the next spot I got to go to. But actually, no, the next spot you got to go to is a connecting node. So hopefully that's going to end up being something that's slightly clearer than it was. All of the things that were causing day one crashes: Magus Tome hip attachment, Triumphant League helmet attachment, Celestial Dominating Blow microtransaction. All of these caused a lot of crashes on day one. They have been fixed after having been turned off for a little while so grinding gear games could work on them. Next, we have something that's interesting. The Originator Voidstone has some very important corrective text on it. This is that Astrolabes cannot drop from maps that are affected by shaped regions, i.e., if an Astrolabe is applying to your present map, then that map cannot generate more Astrolabes. That's something that's always been the case, but it was not clearly explained. And so this is a description change to match what was already the case. I think this is the reason that whilst I had been finding I was getting a modest amount of Astrolabes, not a lot, but I was getting a fair amount of them, other players were complaining that it seemed like they were mirror tier rarity. Well, that's because they couldn't drop for them at all, and that's because the wording on the Originator Voidstone was wrong and was leading those players to think they were eligible to have Astrolabes drop when they weren't. In reality, Astrolabes are pretty rare, but they do seem to drop more frequently than Divine Orbs once they are something that's a valid drop. And of course, that depends on the exact Atlas strategy you're using. That assumes that you're doing something that is Maven Witness oriented. Updated the description of the damage penalty on the Sands of Time unique scepters suspend in time skill to correctly state that the copied skill is used rather than triggered. Call a Pyre from the Pyre Support now states that it requires a melee weapon or unarmed. This is just correcting the description. It always required a melee weapon or unarmed, so it's not being nerfed here. Just in the past, you could try to use it in conjunction with a bow and it wouldn't work. That's because it was never intended to, but the wording was misleading you into thinking that it would work. After this, we have a whole bunch of bug fixes. One of the things with the bug fixes section is that some are more impactful than others, and we're going to go through all of those changes now. Firstly, fixed a few cases of unique item modifiers showing that they scaled with mod effect when they did not actually have a gameplay impact. Notably, the socketed gem modifiers on Black Zenith and Triumvirate Authority. Existing copies of these items with modified values will continue to show the incorrect values, though since those values are only used for display purposes, this does not change their behavior compared to normal copies of the unique. Now, what I think we need to do here is get a couple of copies of Triumvirate Authority that collectively have every single mod that can exist on that item, and just mouse over with a Volatile Vaal Orb and the new tech that was added there so that we can work out what actually does change. It's interesting that last night I was being asked, oh, what are some things that look like they would be fun to gamble up with Volatile Vaal Orbs? And one of the things that I thought was Triumvirate Authority because it looked like it was working. Definitely verify whether it works or not, and that will be done, like I said, by just mousing over one of this item in conjunction with a Volatile Vaal Orb. And if you're unfamiliar with this, this is the item that drops from Uber at 3. It also drops a lesser version of it, drops from regular at 3. And it is something that is an unset ring that augments the specific Vaal gem that you put inside it. But there's a couple of really cool things that it can do. It almost always rolls socketed Vaal skills deal 150% more damage. This on its own is very, very powerful, except for a couple of specific Vaal gems where it's not useful, like Vaal Grace and Vaal Haste, which are genuinely good. But on top of that, there's also increased skill effect duration, which may or may not be good depending upon your build. But the real killers are socketed Vaal skills have 30% reduced soul gain prevention duration, and socketed Vaal skills require 30% less souls per use. These are potentially very good if you can scale those numbers up, most notably that 30% reduced soul gain prevention duration. This is something where just getting a very small amount of extra of that stat over what's normally available can take you over the 100% total, and that can be very, very strong indeed. This is an Uber at 3 drop or also a regular at 3 drop, but the regular at 3 ones tend to be pretty lackluster because they got one less mod. And this is something that could be very good in conjunction with Volatile Vaal Orbs, but it's something that really needs to be tested now that we have the ability to test it properly. Fix the bug where the Marika faction in the Act 4 Dried Lake and Legion encounter wasn't generating chest rewards. That one's quite funny. I didn't realize that was the case because when I see those legions, I usually run straight past them. Fix the bug where the Memory Alter modifier for Breach added additional Clasped Hands, which no longer exist. This modifier instead adds 2 unstable breaches to the area. This is quite the buff, and it's going from doing absolutely nothing to adding 2 unstable breaches, but it's also not something that's going to be very reliable. So this is something you can't bias towards getting, but if you do get it, it's going to be a very welcome upgrade there. Fix the Twist of Fate Atlas Keystone from just not working at all. It was preventing you from running corrupted maps, but its benefits were entirely tied to those corrupted maps. The Keystone clarifies that it does not affect corrupted blighted maps or corrupted maps beyond Voidstone sockets on your Atlas. So what I'm assuming that means there is that the maps formerly known as Tier 17s, i.e. your Nightmare maps, but also things like Shaper Guardian maps, those are no longer going to apply there because they are outside the normal sections of the Atlas. They're in some of the extensions that get added through Voidstones. Fix a bug that could prevent Divine Vessels from being moved into the map device via control and left click. Thank you. That was one of those very small things that was very annoying. Fix an MTX bug with the Bloodthirsty Body Armor microtransaction. Fix a bug where Hiveblood would stop updating on the client after more than a certain total amount had been spent in the league. That is just a quality of life fix. It's something where the game was telling you wrong numbers, and it's no longer going to tell you wrong numbers. Fixed a bug where some seagulls in King's March were no longer fleeing from the player. Bird Bravery will not be tolerated. Fix a bug where the Shockwave has +1 to cooldown modifier granted by Essence of Desolation did not apply to Void Shockwave or Gore Shockwave. Now this here is MTX related ones, so it's kind of funny that if you are using these 2 MTXs then you are griefing yourself on Shockwave. That is no longer going to be the case. Fix a bug where inscribed ultimatums to double a number of fracturing orbs were not functional and were not searchable on the trade website. There's probably going to be quite a lot of these immediately, so that is going to result in a very short-term flood in the amount of fracturing orbs that exist. But it will be pretty small because fracturing orbs are pretty rare. Even though they're dropping from everything, they're definitely not dropping in huge numbers, but they are definitely cheap enough that you can play around with them more than you have been able to in the past. Fixed a bug where various increased fire, cold, and lightning damage prefix modifiers on weapons and shields could not be rerolled using the new Change a Modifier Harvest Crafts. If you haven't played around with these, the new Harvest Crafts that use Crystallized Rancor are incredibly strong. They're things that will allow you to take an item that has potential but is a bit scuffed, and in particular, they will allow you to take things that have got +1 to the class of skills and also plus a big amount of flat damage to spells, but the two don't align. So you might have +1 to the level of cold skills and a big chunk of fire damage added to spells. You can then change that fire damage added to spells into cold damage added to spells, and that will be extremely strong. There's a number of other things that can come up with this as well, so definitely keep those particular crafts in mind. They make a bunch of items that were previously bad able to be salvaged quite well. I didn't realize this was a bug. Glyphic fossils were previously allowed to select modifiers from the Essence of Desolation. This was never intended, and it's not going to be the case in the future. Glyphic fossils, if you're not familiar, these are the fossils that grant corruption exclusive modifiers from essences. Fixed an issue where red beasts spawn in Delve could be very, very far away from the area where they were supposed to be. This is one of those bugs that's really frustrating when it shows up, so glad to see that one dealt with. Fixed a bug where the Labyrinth hazards from the Originator map modifier could be revived in ritual encounters. I don't think you really want those things coming back. Labyrinth hazards are terrifyingly dangerous. They do way more damage than you think because the damage that they do is based upon your life and your energy shield, and as a result, they can just do so much more damage than pretty much anything else. Fix reflect mitigation modifiers on the Watcher's Eye unique jewel appearing at the top of the list of modifiers rather than below the life, mana, energy shield modifiers. It's a bit of a display thing there. They've always intended for life, mana, and energy shield to be at the very top of your Watcher's Eye, and now that's going to be the case. Greater chain support was not working correctly with Spectral Shield Throw. That has been fixed. Fixed a bug where the anti-landmine tech, so this item's price differs from the one you originally traveled to this shop for. This warning was no longer appearing after the vendor window UI had been closed. It is intended to reappear. It is intended to be something that does nag at you a bit. There's one of those things where it's probably a little bit annoying sometimes, but it's also there to really save you and deal with some of the scamming problems that async originally had caused. Fix a bug where the Frostblink of Wintry Blast wasn't supportable by Intensify support. Can I just say Intensify is so much better as a mechanic than it's been in the past? Maybe not necessarily with Frostblink of Wintry Blast, but just in general, this is an incredibly strong mechanic this league because Groningen Games went and provided a new support gem that works incredibly well with it. If you ever wanted to play a build that uses the intensity mechanic alongside crits, then definitely have a look at some of the new gems that have been added this league. Fix a bug where if you died from It That Was Tull's shield throw skill or left the area during that skill, It That Was Tull could fail to reappear, causing the fight to become bricked. And then after that, we have 7 total client crashes that have been fixed, 6 that occur on all platforms, plus a 7th one that was PS5 exclusive. And then after that, we have just a number of Ruthless exclusive fixes, things that you can have a read of if you're interested there, if you're playing in that game mode. So I want to wrap up with the top 3 patch notes from this. This is not necessarily the 3 best or the 3 worst. This is the 3 highest impact. In number 3, we have the changes to A Wish for Rust and A Wish for Terror. So this one's really substantial. It's going to make it so that it is more likely that you will get black barriers when you're doing generic mapping. So when you're doing alch-and-go, not super invested mapping, and you're not trying to farm for Wish for Rust, in that situation, you're going to find that you will get more access to the black barrier and the Sarash fight than you were getting before. However, the strategies that were optimized around chasing down Sarash as much as possible, the city square shenanigans, all of the things involving getting as many map bosses as possible into a fight as you could, those are going to be worse than they were before. So those are the changes there. A bit of a mixed bag, but this is probably going to end up being a positive for most players. Some people will be very unhappy with this. In number 2 in impact, we have this buff, which is primarily going to be felt by alch-and-go mappers. The Wish for Flame, the Wish for Tides, and the Wish for Sands are 3 generically good new things that you can get when you encounter Varashta inside a map. I'm assuming they're all going to be uncommon to rare, but across the number of maps that are run across an entire league, they're going to show up a lot. Even if these are only 1% drop rate each or 0.5% each, that's still going to add up a lot, especially with people that are running fast mapping strategies. It may even be viable in some situations to just go in, look for Verastra in a map, and if she doesn't have one of these, exit. The reason that I say that this is better for alch-and-go strategies, though, is that the loot that you get from this, getting 1 coin of power, 1 coin of knowledge, or 1 coin of skill, this does not scale up with any juicing that you're doing. And as a result, it's just a flat percentage chance to get one each map that you run. We don't know what that percentage is, but it'll probably be estimated reasonably accurately in time. And then in number 1, as the highest impact, the Grinding Games have added a way to destroy non-breach Astrolabes in order to try to create breach ones. Whether this is a good thing for you or a bad thing for you is going to depend upon the content that you're running. It's going to depend upon how much you trade, and it's going to depend on your own personal preference. But this is one of those things where they have simultaneously nerfed off-meta strategies and buffed the top meta strategy, which is a really weird combination of things to do in the middle of a league. But it's already happened, and the flippers have already eaten very good off this one. That's the last change that we'll be discussing there. That's the highest impact one. I'm going to leave it there. May your Vaal Orbs have interesting results.